In other words, there's this old question about whether evil is something that you do or if evil is something that you are. In other words, are there people who are just in their souls just evil people? Or are there people who are made evil, or I guess not even made, but maybe tailored into becoming evil because of the situations that they find themselves in? Or is it just something that people actually wake up every day and decide to do? And I'd suggest to you that most people don't even think about doing evil. Most good and evil in the world is done by people who don't even make up their minds to do good or evil. Because in order to plan out evil, you have to know what good is. And then you have to know what evil is. And if I were to ask you guys to write an essay right now explaining to me the distinction between good and evil and how you come to that conclusion and what the ramifications of it are, I would bet that most of us have a really hard time writing that essay. Because I would imagine that very few of us have ever spent time really investigating the idea of what good and evil are. And unless you know what they are, here's the trip, you really can't pursue them. You might know that an action is evil, but if you don't know the why, or you might think that something is a good action, but if you don't know why, you really can't direct your life towards it. In other words, what happens for most people is they go through life, and they're not for you, they're not against you, they're just for themselves, and they go through life like this, just living their life, doing their things, winging it, and sometimes they land on good, sometimes they land on evil, but the whole time they think they're doing it for their own benefit, to help themselves out. But as we've talked about before, how can you possibly know what's good for you? I'm trying to get a sense of somebody who would be an actual bad guy, but that we would have sympathy towards, if such a thing exists. How about this? Why do bad people do bad things? So then being a bad guy is a matter of not changing when you know differently. So there's that key there, the knowing differently. So I mean, there's two ways of approaching it. One is figuring out why bad guys do bad things, so that you can understand why. And if you understand why, now you can start to predict why they'll do the things that you do, and why they do the things that they do, and then you can protect yourself from it. And then there are some people who do bad things, and we won't even try to figure out exactly why, because why doesn't really matter to us. What matters to us is the fact that they're doing bad stuff. It's this old philosophical question about why is it that bad people do bad things, and specifically when we say bad, I'm going to use the word evil, because evil seems to make more sense. I think a couple of weeks ago I was telling you about a friend of mine who I found out was doing demonic worship stuff. Was it you guys I was telling you about this? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was not you guys? No. All right. Long story short, really long story short, I have a good friend. I don't even know what I'll call him anymore, because I haven't talked to him since New Year's Day, so almost over a month now. I'll leave it at that. So I haven't talked to him. I haven't talked to him since New Year's Day. And then I was talking to another friend of ours who was, he asked me, hey, have you talked to so-and-so? I go, no, it's been a minute. And I said, I think he got rid of all of his social media. Like his phone is disconnected, all of his social media is gone. And my friend said, no, he's not gone off social media. And I go, really? So he pulled up his Instagram. And I'm like, what the hell? And so I brought him up on mine, and it turns out I'm blocked on his social media. And he and I are really close. We're really close friends. It turns out there's a whole bunch of us from this one group who were blocked. For whatever reason, this one guy who I was talking to was the only one who wasn't blocked. Now I'm thinking maybe it's because they weren't super close as it was. So he's like, oh dude, you gotta see some of this stuff. So he pulls it up, and it's a long story short. He's got his most recent post, took screenshots of it. It's like an altar where he's sacrificed some animals to it. He's got the goat's head up on the wall. If you know what you're looking for, you know what you're seeing. This guy is not just hey, look, I've gotten into butchery. This guy is doing some real demonic shit at his house. You see that, again, he's even butchering, he's even sacrificing his own animals and everything. Could I see this friend of mine doing that? Yeah, I could see that because I know some of his background. He wasn't away from all that, but his whole life had just taken this massive turn where, long story short, he left his wife and baby, and he cheated on her with somebody he had known for 3 weeks and moved in with her, right? Now, his background, his father was a pastor. His father ran a church. Can you guess what his father did when he was a little kid? I just told you. Can you guess what his father may have done when he was
Rituals like on animals?
What's that?
Like the rituals on animals?
Not quite yet there. Not quite there yet. But he left his family. Yeah, but that was, he was a pastor, ran a church, cheated on his wife, went with that other woman, left the church, left his son, everything. So he was just repeating the same pattern as his father. Now, he wakes up in the morning, he does his rituals and everything. Do you think he sits there and says, I'm going to do some evil today? Or is there something else that's going on there? Now, there's this old question about whether evil is something that you do or if evil is something that you are. In other words, are there people who are just in their souls just evil people? Or are there people who are made evil, or I guess not even made, but maybe tailored into becoming evil because of the situations that they find themselves in? Or is it just something that people actually wake up every day and decide to do? And I'd suggest to you that most people don't even think about doing evil. Most good and evil in the world is done by people who don't even make up their minds to do good or evil. Because in order to plan out evil, you have to know what good is. And then you have to know what evil is. And if I were to ask you guys to write an essay right now explaining to me the distinction between good and evil and how you come to that conclusion and what the ramifications of it are, I would bet that most of us have a really hard time writing that essay. Because I would imagine that very few of us have ever spent time really investigating the idea of what good and evil are. And unless you know what they are, here's the trip, you really can't pursue them. You might know that an action is evil, but if you don't know the why, or you might think that something is a good action, but if you don't know why, you really can't direct your life towards it. In other words, what happens for most people is they go through life, and they're not for you, they're not against you, they're just for themselves, and they go through life like this, just living their life, doing their things, winging it, and sometimes they land on good, sometimes they land on evil, but the whole time they think they're doing it for their own benefit, to help themselves out. But as we've talked about before, how can you possibly know what's good for you? Should you go to college? Would that be good for you? I don't know. I have no idea. And the trip is that neither do you. You might think, okay, what if I do everything right? I study hard, I get good grades, and then I get into college, and you go to some college, and I don't know, maybe someplace far away even, and you take out a bunch of loans, and you end up getting a job you don't want to pay for those student loans, but you do everything right. What would have happened if you didn't go to college? Imagine if instead you'd gone into the military instead of college. And because you went into the military, you developed a skill set there. You're taught how to become self-motivated, how to be disciplined, how to get things done, how to pay attention to detail, how to be conscientious. And then you get out of the military, you use that same skill set, you start a business, and then you become not just wealthy, who cares, but somebody who actually makes a really significant positive difference in the world. You never would have done that if you had gone to college and done things right. So what's right and what's wrong? None of us can really know in the grand scheme of things, but we can probably know in terms of individual choices that there really is a right or wrong for. Should you go to college or not? There is no right or wrong with that. Your life is going to be what you make of it. Do you make the most of your life if you go to college? Do you make the most of your life if you don't? Do you make the most of your life if you go into the military? Whatever position you're in life, do you make the most of that particular situation? Well, that's how you make a meaningful life. But individual choices, I wonder how many of us sit around and rationalize the good and the evil in our lives. I guess what I'm getting at with the big circle is that what I suggest to you is that people do evil just like people make bad decisions because we just don't know any better. That doesn't mean we couldn't know better. But like my friend, if he's engaging in these things, and let's say that you do believe in all that demonic forces stuff. Let's say you really do believe in Satan and demons and possession and all that. Is what he's doing, is there any way in the world you could possibly look at that and say, hey, this is good. This is good for me to do this. He might look at it and say, oh, I'm getting what I want right now. But is he looking 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, a trillion years into the future? There's no way. And that's the thing with most of the bad things that we do in our lives. That's why I asked that question. I think I asked it again last week. Why is it that we're here in this class? What are we supposed to be doing in English language arts? And if you don't see the why, then you're not going to find a how. And if you don't have a how, then you're not going to get anything out of it. And you'll stumble through it all, and at the end of all of it say, see, I never needed it. But you won't know if you needed it, because it won't be present in your life. It won't be a skill that you have access to in a situation in which you could have used it. It never would have occurred to you to use it. In other words, if you don't know why would you ever use trigonometry? I don't know. And so what that means is I would never use trigonometry because I don't know trigonometry. What if I was in a situation where trigonometry would be useful? I would never even know it would be useful in that situation because I didn't learn it. Unless you know, so you can't possibly ever say, I'm not going to need this or I'm going to need that, because you don't know what your life is going to be like. So instead, it makes sense to gain as many skills as possible to use whenever the situation, the opportunity pops up. This makes sense. So this is a long, long way of saying we get pissed off at people for being evil. Oh, they're doing an evil thing. They're doing a terrible thing. Well, what is good? What is evil? And then we'll take the coward's way out. Well, it depends. On what? Well, everybody has their own perspective. So what? Everybody might have their own perspective on what 2 + 2 equals. Does it make you right, though? How can you know? And you can know. You can know if you just stop and think about things for just a few minutes. What would be the best thing for your life? You might not know in the long term, but what you can say is maximizing what I can get out of today will prepare me for tomorrow. Maximizing what I can get out of today will prepare me for tomorrow. So I guess I'd ask that question. Are you maximizing the things that you can get out of today? Are you getting it, or are you just trying to get by? And if that's the case, well, what do you suppose your life is going to be like? When people tell us these things, and it's good to figure out why. What's the motivation behind it? What would they gain out of that? I don't know what I'd gain out of this by telling you this. But to say again, if you really believe that evil is just a matter of, everybody has their own perspectives, then you have no right to be angry at evil. You also have no right to be excited by good. But once you investigate and you find out what good and evil are, well, then now you can understand the proper way to live. It's like, as a teacher, I can come in here and I know what my days will be like. In fact, forget that. We'll expand it out. When you guys walk through the day, what kind of people are you going to encounter every day? Are you going to encounter people who are nice? Probably. Are you going to encounter assholes? Probably. Are you going to encounter people who are somewhere in between? Yeah. Are you going to encounter people who, who hate you because of your shoes, which is something I heard a few days ago. They said they hated someone because of their shoes, literally. Like, yeah, I suppose so. Are you going to encounter people who hate you for any number of reasons? Yeah, of course. And why? Because they don't know any better. That's what it comes down to. You just don't know any better. And it isn't that, therefore, your job to patronize people and put them down and say, see, you're ignorant. No, I hear what I'm saying. If you knew what was good for you, how would you be behaving? Well, if you knew, not if you had an idea, like, I just don't want to do stuff right now. Fine, man, like I don't get this. Like, for example, I was talking to a teacher recently and they were complaining about a class and they're like, man, my class doesn't do shit. And I asked them, why does that bother you? Why would it bother a teacher? If you guys turn in jack shit all year, how much does that affect my life? As a teacher, 0. It means I grade less. It means I don't have to do nearly as much work. So then why would it bother a teacher? Because a teacher knows more than you in terms of where is that going to take you in your life? Not whether or not you know English, not whether or not you know chemistry, but if you develop the skill set of being able to commit yourself to doing that and seeing it through and learning it, even if you don't see the immediate need for it. Because the need for that stuff oftentimes comes retrospectively. What do I know? 10 years from now, I'm glad I learned those things. Versus 10 years from now saying, I didn't need to know any of that stuff. That just means you're not applying it, you're not using it. And so good, evil, right, wrong, these are all matters of education, not matters of feeling, Because if it is, you have no right to be angry with anybody, but we all intuitively know that we should. In other words, if somebody comes along and commits a genocide, are you bothered by that? If that bothers you, then you probably already are acknowledging that there's such a thing as right and wrong, good and evil. So, if you take that perspective, well, you understand why people are the way they are. Doesn't make you mad anymore. Doesn't make you love them. I'm sorry, doesn't make you like happy that they do evil. But you can look at it and say, you just don't know any better. You just don't know any better. You know. As you know, the less we know, then the more susceptible we are to it. And so, on the other side, if you're the person, as we said before, who gets accused of it, because you'll be criticized for the things that you did do, you'll be criticized for the things that you didn't do. If you're used to being criticized, you might have a heart for people, even if they deserve the criticism. Maybe then there's an opportunity to educate and to learn. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Happy Monday. Yeah.